Welcome back. Yesterday, I looked through a bunch of Blitz games that I had played in which I tried the French defense as the response to White's e4. And I felt confident enough after that last night when I played my rapid game on Lichess, I played the French defense. And this is the game. I'm going to go through this game and see, if I could have done better. Although it looks from this little game review here that I did just fine out until my first inaccuracy was move 11. I am going to open up the opening book here to, I don't know if I should use the Masters database or the Lichess Players database. I mean, I'm not going to face any titled players, but I do like to know what they'd played. My opponent played d4 here, which I understand being the most common response to the French defense, and I played d5. I'm also curious about what Stockfish suggests here. It looks like in the players database, I can expect the advanced variation more often than the exchange variation, and a knight coming out becomes increasingly rare. Well, that's helpful to know. My opponent did play the advanced variation, and I learned from my analysis yesterday in that video that what I'm supposed to play here is c5. Okay, Stockfish actually says knight to e7 here. Well, maybe I misremembered that, but anyway, I remembered to play c5 based on that analysis. Of course, the idea is if they take, then I will take. c3 is what I can expect both from Stockfish and from my opponents. They did play c3, and then I thought I was supposed to get the knight out, but the engine says bishop to d7. I guess that's to discourage this check. It looks like knight to c6 has about the same evaluation. That's what I played. We're putting pressure on this pawn just like we do in the Caro-Kann defense. The main difference here being that I have played e6 instead of in the Caro-Kann defense when I've reached a similar position to this. I've played c6 and then played c5, so I moved that pawn twice and still haven't played this one. So I'm still trying to get the differences between the two defenses in my mind. So I think in this one, at this point, I'm a move ahead because I didn't have to move the c-pawn twice. But my bishop's trapped because in the Caro-Kann defense, I would probably have that bishop over there. Anyway, my opponent did play knight to f3, which looks like the most common move here. So we're both doing okay. And it looks like the engine and the player's database both say queen to b6 here. I did play that just because, again, experience with the Caro-Kann defense, not only am I helping to put pressure on that d-pawn, but, I'm discouraging their bishop from moving down there. So I did play queen to b6, and here is the first major departure between what the engine suggests and what players play. It looks like a3 or g3 is what the engine would play here, but I can expect opponents to play bishop to d3, bishop to e2, or bishop to e3. And it looks like 4.5 million games have reached this position, according to the Lichess Players database. My opponent did play one of those bishop moves. And here the engine says I should just go ahead and take the d-pawn, which is interesting to me because my opponent has 1, 2, 3 defenders on it, and I only have 2 attackers after I put the pawn there. But it says after they take back, oh, I would put this knight over here. Oh, I put the knight over there first. Okay, well, it wasn't counted as inaccurate. I put the knight here first, and I think that's because I remembered a long time ago somebody saying that if they took that, then I get this pawn, and I'm threatening their rook. If they move to save the rook, I get the bishop, and I've opened up a line for this rook down here this way. So I must have played those a little out of order. My opponent has one of the biggest advantages that they had right here in the opening, but we're still between +1 and -1, so I'm okay. And it does say that their best move is to take, but most players here will castle, or nearly have. And my opponent castled. And now I'm supposed to take this pawn, but it says the most common move by players is to put the knight on f5. Okay, well, that's what I did. And again, the idea is to put another attacker on the d-pawn. This is something that, this little battle over the d-pawn is something I'm familiar with because of the Caro-Kann defense. And now my opponent's just supposed to take here, and I would take back. And that would, get rid of that little battle. In fact, it does say that that's what the most common move is, what I should expect if I reach this position again. And the engine says, well, that's White's best move. I can understand why White wouldn't want to play that. I guess my opponent didn't want to play it. They played knight to a3, which I'm pretty sure was trying to come this way, but my pawn's guarding that square. Or it was trying to protect the bishop coming over here. I'm not sure exactly why they played that. Okay, maybe they were preparing, to push this pawn. Regardless, here we have another confluence between the engine, the player's database, and what I played, which is I went ahead and took that pawn because I was confident now that I had more attackers on that square than my opponent had defenders, or the same amount. Okay, and they're supposed to play g4. That's not common. I shouldn't expect that from my opponents, but that's what the engine would play here is g4, which would make this knight go back, and then they would have more defenders on that square. Amazing. Okay, well, my opponent didn't think of that. My opponent did what 83% of Lichess players would play here, which is take the c-pawn. The engine, the database, and me all say take here. And the reason is because I think this knight is a little bit more out of place than these pieces over here. It makes more sense to get rid of the f knight first. Although the engine says the c knight would be just as good. So we're here at move 9, and I'm doing fine. My opponent is supposed to take back with the knight, and they did. Taking back with my... Wait a minute. I thought I took back with the knight here. Why did I take back? Oh, I offered the queen trade. Oh, and the engine says that's slightly better. I thought a second ago it said the knight was slightly better, but I must have misread it. Taking with the queen is slightly better, but not nearly as common. Well, even though I don't remember taking with the queen first, I can tell you why I did, because I've gotten pretty accustomed to offering queen trades to my opponents when everything else seems to be about equal. Now here I am going to be up a pawn after I take that, but even if we were equal, I found that so many of my opponents like to avoid the queen trade. And I figured that if I took this and they didn't want a queen trade and they just moved over or blocked, then I'm going to get another pawn. My opponent's best move here is knight to b5, according to the engine. And it says that I wouldn't trade queens there. I would take this pawn, which protects the square that their knight is aiming at. Okay, that makes sense. If they had done that, I probably would have taken the queen and then gone here, and then they would have forked me with their knight. But they didn't do that. They also didn't take my queen, which is their next best move. And they didn't do what I thought they might, which is block, allowing me to have this pawn. They just developed their other bishop. So 11 moves in, I'm ahead -2. If I will just take this pawn, which is free, and defends this in case they do try to wander in here with their knight. My second best move is to take that pawn down there on b2, which would make sense because then their knight's undefended. And it says if I did that, then they would play the knight to b5. But then I would slingshot back and take this pawn. Oh, I could have gotten both pawns. If I had taken the e pawn first, they would have protected the other one. And then I would have played a6 to prevent the knight coming in. Okay. And surprisingly enough, we're still in the Lichess Players database book here. Probably not the Masters database, no. But Lichess players have reached this exact position 153 times. And more than half, including me, took the queen. And the next most common move is to take this pawn. And only 13% took the b pawn, which, now that I think about it, that makes a lot more sense. If I take the b pawn, if they challenge me with the rook, I get the knight. If they move the knight, then I come back and get the e pawn too. Okay, well, chances are I won't reach this exact position again, but I think I would take that pawn and then see what they do, and it looks like I'll be able to get the e pawn as well. Or the knight if they mess up. Okay, but my first inaccuracy was here, taking the queen. That set me back a little ways. -1.1 because it was -2.1 if I took one of those pawns, but now we're only -1.1. I'm still ahead. They're going to take back. It looks like most people around my level and the engine would take my queen with their f rook, but my opponent took with the a rook, and I was pretty happy so far because after all my analysis of those blitz games yesterday, I was playing these moves pretty quickly because I felt so confident in them, and I've spent less than a minute. Here we are on move 12. I've spent less than a minute and I'm ahead. My opponent has spent nearly 2 minutes and they're down, and I've got a pawn for free here. I think the reason that I didn't take it is because I finally saw the opportunity for their knight to jump in here. Because if I take this pawn and their knight comes in here, then how am I going to defend against that fork? I'm going to have to move my king? Probably. But I also saw that if I take the knight and they double those pawns, not only is that doubled pawns, which isn't very good usually, but they're isolated. They're way over there on the outer file. And I would effectively be up another pawn. Not only that, assuming that they took back, then I would get this pawn here. And it does look like that's the top move. And those are the top 2 moves played in the few remaining players here in the database. So I took that knight and they took back. Now we're down to just 51 games that have reached this position. And I made a mistake here. I castled. It's not a mistake. It's another inaccuracy, my second inaccuracy. And I think the reason that I did it was because it looked like they could then pin this knight if I didn't castle. Or rather, if I took the pawn, then they would check me, and then I would have to bring the knight back. But I think that would have been okay, right? It says that they wouldn't have, but if I had taken the pawn first, couldn't they have checked me? Oh no, I could have blocked with the bishop then. What if they had just defended the bishop? Oh, it says I just would have taken it. They could have undoubled their pawns, and then my best move would be either knight to c4 or castling, but somehow doing it in that order, I'm up -3, even though I'm still up just the 2 pawns. Oh, here I'm only up 1 pawn because I didn't take this. Castling gives them the chance to defend that with f4. I honestly thought they would have defended it with the bishop, but it makes more sense to defend it with the pawn. That's their best move here. And now we're back nearly to even, and my opponent did play one of those 2 best moves, which bishop to c5, aiming at the rook. Okay, they did play that. I probably should move the rook over. No. Oh, for a second there it said taking this pawn was my best move, but it's not much worse than just moving the rook over. Looks like every player with the black pieces on Lichess who's reached this position, all three of them moved the rook, either to e8 or d8. d8 being slightly better according to the engine. Okay, well I did that. I thought, this pawn is passed. Rooks belong behind passed pawns. We're 14 moves in and we're still not alone here. We still have not reached a new position. Somebody else rated a little bit higher than us has played this game before in a bullet game 4.5 years ago. f4 is the best move according to the engine, but bishop to d6 is the next best move. And that's what my opponent played, and that's what the other player 4.5 years ago played was here. And that's a problem, I guess, because I don't have a dark squared bishop, and I'm not going to trade my rook for it. It's going to be hard, I guess, to get my knight around to trade off for the bishop. And I should just play b6. Wait, why should I play b6? Because then they would come here, wouldn't they? The only other game that reached this position, they played h6 here. I did not play h6, so we're going to get rid of that book there. I was more worried about the light squared bishop coming here, so I played a6. But the engine says I should have played b6, and they would have slid down here to attack my rook, and I would have moved the rook up one, and they would have gone back. I don't know why. But I played a6 to keep the light squared bishop from coming in. My opponent should have played rook to b1 or a4. I'm not sure why. My opponent played rook to c1, which I guess makes more sense because it looked like I was thinking of maybe playing my b pawn, which would leave my knight undefended. Okay, good. Bishop to d7. That was my best move. After I played it, I thought it must have been a mistake because it disconnected my rook from aiming at the bishop, which I wanted to do. But I also did want to play my b pawn, and I had to defend the knight with the bishop in order to do that, and of course to be able to move the rook. Now I guess because this is the only fully open file on the board, my opponent decided to double their rooks there. So they moved this rook up, I assume, with the intent of bringing their other rook over, and I should have played knight to d4, which would have forced them to defend the bishop, and then I would have brought the other rook over, offering the rook trade. I don't know about that. I'm still up just one pawn. Okay, well here is my only mistake according to this little game review here, and my idea I thought was pretty simple. I wanted to get rid of this pawn. That pawn is what got this bishop stuck in here. But I think I did this a little out of order. The engine says I should have played either h6 or knight to d4. I don't know that I would have found knight to d4. I think if they had done that, I just would have expected them to move this bishop someplace or defend it. I mean, they could have just moved it up one and it would have been fine. And then what am I doing over here? I'm aiming for this fork. No, I'm not, because their bishop's guarding that. Okay, yeah, I don't think I would have found knight to d4. That seems a little high level to me, but I guess I understand why this is wrong. If they do take it, I'm opening up my king, and I can't move my king over here. Their bishop's guarding this diagonal. But again, I wanted to get this bishop out of the way eventually, so that's why I played f6, and that took us back to very nearly even again. My opponent should have just taken it, but I guess instead of doubling rooks, they decided to attack this pawn, which is undefended, and they did, but now that pawn's undefended. I can take it with my knight, which is what the engine would do, or with my pawn, and I'm ahead again. So I did that, and now their bishop should probably move. At least if I were them, I would think about moving that bishop now because I'm going to move my light squared bishop, and then their bishop's going to be toast. But the engine says bishop to g4, interestingly enough. Oh, to keep me from moving this bishop. But I would play h5 to get them to move the bishop. They would take it, then I would move my bishop, and then they would have to move their bishop. Wow. But they wouldn't. They wouldn't, though. They would trade for mine. Oh, wow. Okay, well, that's a pretty sharp line there. I don't know if I would expect an opponent to find that. And if they did, I probably wouldn't give away a pawn trying to do this. But my opponent went ahead with their plan. They had moved this rook over here with the pure intent of taking my undefended b pawn. So they did that. All right, here. The engine says I should just go ahead and attack that rook immediately. But then they would just move over. And I would take this this bishop, and then they would take the knight with the rook from, oh wow, look at that, r3, xc6. Pretty complex notation there, but wait, they would take that, and then I would take, and then they would take. Oh wow, we would just get rid of all those pieces. And then I would just have a rook and a bishop left, and they would just have a rook and a bishop left, and I would still be up a pawn. That gets pretty complicated too, but I brought the bishop back the other way, and that's another inaccuracy. Looks like my third inaccuracy. Was that my last one? Yeah, my last inaccuracy. The idea was to keep defending the knight while attacking their bishop at the same time. And what they should have played here is bishop to c7, attacking my rook and getting their bishop out of danger. And I would have come over one, attacking their bishop again, and they would have brought their king. That's what the line says. No, I think they would have brought the bishop back. What it says, bishop to c7. I would move this rook over to c8 or put my knight on d4. Rook to c8, and it does not say they would put this back. It says they would play bishop to g4 or bring their king. Wow. Well, what my opponent did was play bishop to g4 here, before any of this mess on c8 and c7, and it was counted as a blunder. Obviously, they're going for the undefended pawn, but I think that the problem is I can just take their bishop now, because that's the reason I moved this. But maybe they had been counting on me moving this so that they could attack the undefended pawn? But yeah, that's a blunder because it gave up this bishop, which should have attacked my rook, but didn't, so I took it, and my opponent resigned. So just like all of those blitz games, this one came down to tactics, positional battles here later in the game rather than the opening, which is how chess games should go, in my opinion. One of the reasons that I learn openings, or at least learn the first few moves, the basic ideas of several of these different openings, is so that I don't go behind after move 4, which is what used to happen. Before I learned any openings, when I first got back into chess a couple of years ago, I would just start making moves, and then after 4 or 5 moves, I'd be like, wait, why am I losing? And it's because I didn't know that my opponent knew an opening out to so many moves. And once I realized that, I started learning some. And so here I think I did a pretty good job, especially remembering the stuff I learned yesterday, like here playing c5. But now I know that knight to e7 is just as good, and they would still play c3, and I would still play c5 after that. Interesting, even though my bishop wouldn't be guarding it. Okay, but making it out to through here without any inaccuracies, I have to be happy with that for now. If any of you play the French defense, let me know. Let me know what your favorite variations of it are, and let me know, if there's any reason you think that some of the things I'm playing, might not be the best. It's brand new to me, so I'm not gonna, I don't have a high horse to sit on. I'll take the advice. I'll consider it. I may not do it, but I'll listen to it. Anyway, thank you for being here. I'll see you next time.